My name's Tony Scott and I work for Merseyside Recycling and Waste Authority, and I'm the Waste Prevention Officer. So it's my role to work with the community to try and prevent waste in the first place. If we can't do that, we'd like to reuse, repair, or as an alternative for organic waste is to compost. So that's been the sole aim of this project. So today's event is to show you a video that we've put together, which you can share with the people that receive the compost bins. So alongside me today, we can't see because we're having IT problems, is my colleague Danny Miller, who's the education officer. After we've had the video, I will then introduce you to Annie Merry of Faith for Change, if you've heard of them. And she'll talk about the project that she's currently working on and the well-being aspects of composting. And then we'll finish off with a couple of questions. You can forward me any questions if you think of any after the event, and I'll do a Q&A session to send round, and I'll then forward the links to yourself to the video, which will be available directly on YouTube, or you'll have a link directly from us. So if we'd like to start the video first, and then we'll reconvene after that.
Composting copies what happens in the natural world. The composting process works to decay organic material by providing the ideal conditions for organisms to thrive and for them to do their job. Composting means taking plant materials like grass, flowers, hedge clippings and other composted materials such as cardboard and paper and piling it up in a special bin or homemade container where it will rot down over time. The end product will be a nutrient-rich heap that when mixed with soil, for example, can help grow crops, plants, shrubs and trees. When home composting, there are 4 key ingredients that are needed to be successful. These ingredients are air, water, and a supply of green and brown materials. A compost heap will only work well if the balance is right between all 4 ingredients. Air helps provide the space in a compost heap so that it can breathe. Turning a compost heap is important as it reintroduces air into the heap when it becomes too compact. Turning also helps break up materials that may have matted over time. Water is essential in a compost heap. If the heap is left to go too dry, then the microbes will become inactive. If it is too wet, the nutrients will be washed out. Ideally, when a handful of compost is squeezed, it should release a couple of drops of water. Greens refers to the organic waste that is high in nitrogen. They are essential in retaining the heat in our compost bins. Greens can include such items as food scraps, vegetable peelings, grass cuttings, garden weeds, hedge clippings, flowers, coffee grounds, tea bags, fresh leaves and other garden waste. Browns are carbon-rich material and are the main food source for the microorganisms in our compost bins. They consist of dry leaves, hay, straw, shrub prunings, pine cones, wood ash, newspapers, shredded paper, cardboard, sawdust, paper bags, eggshells, vegetarian pet waste, and also vacuum waste. Anything that won't naturally decompose, like plastic, rubber or metals, should not be put in your compost bin. Most of these materials can be recycled instead. The most important materials to avoid while composting are meat, fish, dairy products, or any cooked food like rice or pasta. Avoiding these types of items will deter vermin. Any non-vegetarian animal waste and diseased plants should also be avoided. During the time that you are composting, The activities in your bin will go through 3 phases. These phases are known as the warm, cool and mature phases. The temperature and the heat plays an important role as it helps organisms eat more food and reproduce at a faster rate. The average temperature of a home compost bin should be between 70 to 90 Fahrenheit or 21 to 32 Celsius. In the warm phase, the heat increases in the compost heap where there are microorganisms like bacteria and fungi present. Each time fresh materials are added to the bin, the temperature increases. During the warm phase, microbes, bacteria and fungi break down the green materials. The energy they provide raises the temperature, which encourages more bacteria to become active. When all the green materials have broken down, there will be no food left for the microorganisms, which means that they will begin to die. This causes the temperature to cool down. Wood-degrading microorganisms then move into the heap and start to break down the carbon, which warms up the bin again. As the temperature cools right down, invertebrates like centipedes, woodlice and beetles move in and help break down the material further. The mature phase allows earthworms, insects and mites to move into the bin. The material will look dark brown in colour and will have an earthy smell. Large pieces of material, such as twigs, will still be visible. A mature compost heap is often not completely lifeless, and worms and insects will continue to work in the heap and stabilise it. It takes about a year or so for the compost at the bottom of your bins to be ready to use. You can extract the compost from the hatch at the bottom, or you can lift the entire bin up. If you lift the bin, you can then move the uncomposted materials at the top to a new bin or area and start the process again. Once your compost is ready, it can be used for a range of things. Finely sifted compost can be used for potted plants or dressing lawns. Bulky compost can be added to soil as a conditioner and will continue to mature and add valuable nutrients. You can also use it at the bottom of potted plants to cut down the amount of bagged compost that you may buy. There are 3 common issues all composters face at some point. However, they're easy to fix. Here's what to look out for. Does the compost have a bad odour? The problem is there's not enough air in the heap. The solution is to turn the heap or add coarser material. Is the centre of the heap dry? The problem why the centre of the heap is dry is because there's not enough water. The solution is to add water to wet the heap, then turn it to let the water through. Is the heap damp and sweet smelling, but not heating up? The problem is lack of nitrogen or green material. The solution is to mix in some greens such as fresh grass cuttings or fresh manure.
Hello again, everybody. Hope you found the video informative. While my colleague just plays around with some of the bits and pieces, I'd just like to put things into context in terms of the Waste Disposal Authority. Not many people really know who we are. When I ask people, when I'm out talking with people, what happens to their waste, you go, the bin man takes it. That appears to be end of the story, but what happens is that all the waste that's collected by the local councils is brought to us, and it goes through either a waste transfer station or the recycler goes to recycling facilities, And also we're responsible for the 14 household waste recycling centres. So you will have come across us many times that you've been to the tip. But one of the key things we want to address and prevent is food waste. In our last waste composition analysis, there was 140,000 tonnes of food discarded in the household bins. So if we add to that 100,000 tonnes that goes to the household waste recycling centres, there's quite a lot of organic waste that's disposed of across Merseyside. That 140,000 tonnes is a small proportion of the 7 million tonnes the UK throws away in terms of food every year. And if we look at the production and consumption of food worldwide, a third of all food that's produced is thrown away. And that's a lot of food. And if you're concerned with climate change, food, when compared to the carbon emissions, is the third largest country in the world after the US and China. So next I would like to introduce you to Annie Merry, Faith for Change, and she'll be talking to you about one of the projects that she's involved with.
Hi, good morning. I may be kind of teaching my grandmother to suck eggs, so to speak. We're talking about composting, as I guess because you're here, you're already interested or already doing it. And probably like me, have come across various mixes and solutions and challenges along the path. I wanted to just share with you a little bit about kind of composting, really, in the kind of well-being context. Faiths for Change is an environmental charity. We're based on Merseyside. We've been functioning for the last 16 years. And one of the key areas of our work is around community gardening, and really kind of working with communities to create gardening spaces. And composting is an essential element of that. Just as kind of flour or eggs or sugar or fruit is to kind of cake, composting is key. And not just for the obvious reasons. I think, you know, we can, in the kind of wider context of the last year, we've seen a huge rise in the number of people, even just in their backyards, growing, gardening, getting in touch. Seeds and plants in the first lockdown kind of sold out really quickly. It was really difficult to buy seeds. And sorry, I thought I'd silenced my phone. My apologies. Sorry, that always happens, doesn't it? Just when you think you've silenced it. On a personal level, I think the connection with the natural life cycle that comes from just composting the food waste that you have that is inedible, because I think it's important to distinguish between edible and inedible food. And as the video that Tony shared with us showed, there is some stuff that is great to compost and there's other stuff that is really not good. So in terms of the compostable elements of our food waste, I think just that kind of every day collecting that stuff from the kitchen and putting it in a bin, and gradually over time, even if you're not turning it, gradually over time, the observation of what happens to that, even if you're just having a quick look in when you're popping it in the morning or the evening, you can't help but notice the different creatures and processes that are happening. I think, you know, to some extent, I think there's a little awe and wonder with the kind of smaller creatures that are generally under our feet in our soil that we don't generally notice in our busy lives, and unless we're kind of keen gardeners. I think that connection with kind of the natural life cycles actually is pretty good for us as people. It causes us to slow down a little bit and connect with what's going on naturally, that we are a part of, whether we kind of like to think we are or we kind of don't take too much notice. At a community level, particularly in the Roots Garden that we've been working in partnership with St Michael's in the City Church on for the last 2 years, and we've seen a real connection through composting, that people have gained, people that come. I would say things have changed a little bit for us, obviously, as they have with most organisations that are delivering kind of community projects over the last couple of years. And we have had, over the last year particularly, we've had periods where we can only have a really small number of people in the garden. But people have really missed being in the space when they can't be. And one of the things that we've provided is home gardening kits. And part of that for us going forward will include a compost bin, particularly where people have got a small garden. Being able to compost at home obviously means that you can then use that compost yourself. And you know what, even if it's not great stuff, if it's not that beautiful stuff that looks pretty similar to the open plastic single-use bag that we have, even the rough stuff just adds bulk to our soil. We know that kind of adding bulk to our soil doesn't just kind of reduce the kind of weeds coming through, which is generally good news, but it also helps keep the moisture in the soil. It protects the insect life that's within the soil, and without the insect life, we have some major problems with our ecology, which we're probably all familiar with the decline in insect species who are pretty much the kind of lower part of the food chain, and that has implications all the way up, including for us. But that connection with others, I think, that we get through composting. People are genuinely delighted. People of all ages are genuinely delighted at the good stuff that comes out as a result of pet bedding and fruit peelings and old tea bags. And I can say that it's, without a doubt, it's one of the things that encourages people to kind of come and join and stay within the gardening groups that we kind of offer, particularly at St Michael's, but elsewhere as well. That real connection with the earth that comes through composting. People now quite voluntarily bring their own food waste that they've collected at home, partly because over time they're initially not sure of how to compost. And despite leaflets and information, sometimes just the kind of doing it alongside other people and getting a feel for, okay, is this quite right? It's a bit like experimenting with a favorite cake recipe, I always think. You know, sometimes it needs a little bit more of this, sometimes it needs a little bit more of that, as we've seen in the video, a bit of troubleshooting. And it's like with everything else, our confidence in making compost builds over time, and that in its own gentle and small way kind of actually adds to our self-esteem that, you know what, we're part of a process and it's something we can take an active hand in. In terms of the programme that Tony's currently running with the giving away of individual compost bins, we're linking that to a wider project with Compostworks to establish a community composting facility in the community garden at St Michael's. So although some people will have compost bins to use at home for themselves, we'll still have a general compost facility that we hope over the next 2 years to have 100 people contributing to. Ultimately, one of our goals is that composting inedible food waste becomes as normal everyday activity as brushing your teeth. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that informative and clearly enthusiastic approach to an unwanted substance that we can certainly make better use of. I know we've given you a lot of information, the video and his little chat then. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to ask. Or if you can pop me some questions, I'll do a short Q&A session that I'll send out to everybody at the end. There'll be some questions that you'll think of after the event. So again, you can pop them back to me and I'll do my utmost to answer all the questions. So from today, my hopes and intentions are to continue this sort of format going forward. So it really is open to yourself as to what you'd like to discuss next time. As Annie has already alluded to, she's working with Compostworks about setting up community composting. I know it's a bit early now, you've got to get it right yourself, but eventually you'll be able to form groups and do your own community composting in the future. That would be my hopes and aspirations. So finally, I'd like to thank you all for logging in and listening to this webinar, and hope to see you again. Thank you very much.